Most Americans are already in a recession, and I want to share with you some data that supports that. Now, there's a theory that the top 10 to top 20% of wage earners are truly what's holding up the economy and keeping it from entering a true recession. And when you look at the data, it sure does look that way. Now, before we begin, what is a true recession? A true recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. Now, when you look at the numbers, we're nowhere near that. But the theory suggests that really it is the top earners that is propping up the market. And I think that I might have to agree with that, and you might as well after we go over this data. So let's do just that. As always, my name is Derek, and I got my degree in finance, so you don't have to. Let's talk about why I believe that most of America is already in a recession, or at least feels that way. So, first and foremost, we have to look at savings rates. Now, the current average savings rate is 3.9% of one's paycheck. And I want to know, I'm curious to know in the comments if you're even able to save anything at all. And if over the last 2 years, if you are able to save, have you been able to save less and less? Because that's what this says. Now, the historical average is closer to 8.9%. So we're less than half of that currently. And I think most people might actually not be able to save anything at all. And those savings rates might come from, again, the top maybe 30, 40% of Americans. Now, the next concerning bit of data is that pandemic savings is largely gone. So at one point, pandemic savings was above $1 trillion. So this is excess savings above the historical savings rate. The reason this was a case was mostly because of quantitative easing, those paychecks that we all received, well, some of us, and on top of that, the fact that most businesses were closed for a long time, so we didn't really have anywhere to spend our money that we were receiving. So those pandemic savings used to be over $1 trillion. They're down to $190 billion. And by some predictions, they will either be completely gone by this month or by January of 2024. That's another big thing. That means that people are not earning enough to be able to pay their monthly bills. And on top of that, when you have such a low unemployment rate, and people are still not able to pay their monthly bills, what does that signal? That signals that the amount that we are being paid as Americans is not keeping up with inflation. And the data also suggests that. So all this put together, while maybe we haven't entered a true recession, a true 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP, the majority of Americans probably feel that way because they are feeling financial pressure and they are feeling stressed. When you look at the numbers of people who are stressed about money, it has almost doubled from pre-pandemic levels. Okay, another bit of concerning data. Nearly half, so 49% of adults have less savings or no savings when compared to a year ago. So again, I want you to, if you can, look at your savings from 365 days ago. Was that number higher or lower than it is now? I think for a majority of Americans, that number is probably lower. Another way you can do this is look at your net worth. Is your net worth higher or lower than it was a year ago? And go ahead and include your car if you own it or the equity that you have in it. Go ahead and include your home if you own it or the equity that you have in it. Even then, there are some positives like stronger equity in the home. But even then, if you look at all that, I'd be hard pressed to say that most Americans do not have less net worth now than a year ago. So do that, do the math yourself and see what you come out with. Okay, now another bit of very concerning information is that wage growth for the year is only up 4.4%. That is barely more than inflation. And in reality, when you look at inflation that people are feeling, a lot of people say that inflation is a lot higher than the number, than the CPI or the core number. And that is because those baskets don't necessarily reflect what everyone is feeling. So wage growth is barely or probably not keeping up with inflation. And any time that you have wage growth that does not outpace inflation, you have people who suffer because basically you are getting poorer in a sense, and your earning power is going down even though your paycheck is going up. Now, this one is super concerning. I really, when I read this, I didn't realize that it was this bad, but over 30% of Americans have more credit card debt than cash reserves. That's a twofold problem. Right now, credit card debt is at an all-time high, and on top of that, interest rates are very, very high on credit cards, and they're even higher currently because of the federal policy of high interest rates. When you have more credit card debt than cash reserves, that extrapolates or makes the problem even worse. Because if you had more cash reserves than credit card debt, you can pay that off at any time. But if you have more credit card debt than cash reserves, you have high interest debt that you physically cannot pay off. That is dangerous. On top of that, we also have to look at other forms of debt. For example, school loans they're about to be not due, but payments are about to resume. For about the last 3 years, people have not been paying on school loans and school debt. So that is going to increase. I think the average from what I read was, don't quote me on this, but around $300. So that is a $300 extra per month of debt that people are basically not going to be able to pay because people are already squeezed so tight. So that again is going to make the average American feel poor. And it could send the economy into a real recession because it drags down spending if people have to divert spending to essential spending. So again, when you look at the data, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, when you look at the data, it sure does look like the majority of the country is already in recession, even though the technical definition has not been hit yet. Okay, this one I think is concerning, but at the same time, it's probably the reality that most Americans have been living in for a decade or more. 57% of Americans could not afford a $1,000 emergency payment, according to a new poll. Now, that is scary, but at the same time, I'm less concerned with that because I think that has just been how it is for history, for at least for a long time. People tend to live paycheck to paycheck in this country, but I think it's worse right now than it's ever been. And on top of that, when you have such high interest rates, that's only putting more pressure to live paycheck to paycheck. And that is why so many Americans are getting second jobs and third jobs. Let me know in the comments if you've had to get a second job or a third job. I know a lot of Americans have, especially when you have children, when you have major medical bills. All those things add up. And a lot of times people have to get second or third jobs. So I guess what I'm trying to say with this video, or I guess the question that I'm trying to ask is, one, is the economy being propped up by two main things? One, the top 10 to 20% of wage earners who have gotten wealthier over time. That is a fact, and they are feeling the benefits, not the negatives, of everything that's going on, okay? Because they own assets that are increasing. They own debt that is increasing in the form of bonds, etc. So is that one of the major reasons why we haven't entered a true recession yet? And secondly, for the average American, pandemic savings have been a source of funding for their life, for your life. So once that runs out, which it looks like at the latest it'll run out in January, once that runs out, what is going to happen to consumer spending and to non-essential spending? Is that going to come down? That means luxury goods. That means technology. That means new cars. All those things that prop up the economy. Is that going to cause a toll on the economy? And could that be one of the reasons why we haven't entered a recession yet? And could it just be looming around the corner? Because these savings are about to expire, in a sense. And once that happens, I don't necessarily know how Americans are going to be able to keep paying their bills. So we'll have to see. I want to hear your thoughts. This is the situation that we're in, unfortunately. And I truly do believe that most Americans do not feel like they are thriving right now. I truly do believe that most Americans do not feel like we just experienced 5% GDP growth, okay? I think most Americans are feeling the exact opposite. And I think most Americans are feeling like, what do you mean we're not in recession yet? I've been in recession for a year. I think that's how most people feel. So let me know your thoughts. I hope this video was informative. I hope it wasn't too long or too dragged out. I just want to give you the data. There's so much clickbait out there and so much bullshit. I don't want to do that. I want to keep it real with you guys. I want to share data and I want to have a conversation with you because I do not have a chip on my shoulder. I do not think I'm the smartest person in the room. And I know that I can learn from you just like you can learn from me. And that is the best form of relationship, is when both people, both parties can learn. So I hope I can learn something from you as well. If you like these videos, you're in the right place. If you like personal finance, world economics, and just financial topics broken down simply and have a discussion about those things, you are in the right place. So please consider subscribing. This is a relatively new YouTube channel, and it is something that I am very passionate about and I want to continue doing. And don't forget to turn on the bell notification so you don't miss the next video. Those videos usually come out on Tuesdays, but sometimes I'll have a new video Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, especially if some major event, the Fed says something, some major recessionary event, the market changes, something like that. I'll always keep you guys up to date. Other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day. I hope you have a great rest of your week as best as you can in the situation that this country is in, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.